Hi everybody, just want to do a quick update video about some thoughts about the future of the Mario Kart community. So, let's get into it. Our community is facing a bit of an inflection point coming up, with the new game coming out at some point soon, and I have no doubts that it's going to be an awesome time. I'm super excited for it, and even the process that leads up to the game's release as well. And when this game comes out, there's going to be a wave of new motivation that hits the online community. New players will appear, and current members will likely experience a jump in ability and feel a confidence boost. No longer will anyone be years behind, and if you hit the ground running, you're likely going to have some opportunities that you never thought were possible before. And perhaps it means that you hit a new lounge rank, or maybe your team beats a team that you once thought to be leagues above your level. And the months where nobody knows how good they truly are will be crazy. This is a part of the natural cycle of things. The community will experience a bit of a reset, and I think it will be the best time to join the community as well. Of course, we've been waiting for this moment for a long time, so I'd like to say, take it in. But here is my question. What happens when the high of the new game wears off? And it almost feels taboo to ask at this time, like why can't I just enjoy things, you might think? Well, I will enjoy things, it's just I don't want those feelings to eventually fade. The way I see it, Mario Kart 9 is a massive opportunity for all of us, but it alone will not save us from the stagnant cycle we felt in the later years of Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. If we want to make the most of this new era, we need to identify what the problems of our current era are, or else we're going to be doomed to repeat them. Now, it's not like we face some kind of Armageddon scenario here. The alarms are not exactly going off, and things are pretty stable. What this means is that the problems are not exactly obvious, though. And as a site administrator, it is my job to notice any issues I can, and to read the trends. So my goal today is to convince you of the problems that I believe exist, explain why I think we are limiting our potential, and then reiterate what I believe the solutions are that will make our community more appealing for new players down the road. Regardless if you're a community veteran or just a curious subscriber taking a look from the outside in, your feedback on what appeals to you will be appreciated. So with that, let's get started. A few weeks back, I was asked about the state of MK Central's broadcasting and media team. It is of course important to never be a doomer, but I also think that sugarcoating everything isn't exactly healthy either. We're in a rough spot. This isn't the fault of any one person, but let's be realistic. We have a large team, yet despite that, it feels like nobody is actually motivated to cast matches or host streams anymore. We are months behind on our uploads. Projects like the MK Central Top 10 sound exciting, but they are hard to maintain. There hasn't been a new site article in years, and adding people to the team doesn't fix any of this. It appears that it just makes everyone feel that their responsibility is slightly less. What we're left with are occasional MKU primetime streams that seem to be less inspired than what they used to be. But on top of this all, I believe the issue is a whole lot deeper than it looks on its surface. My question is, why is there demotivation to begin with? The LAN side of the community makes for an interesting contrast, as casting seems to be in hot demand over there. The problems there are much better ones to have, it's just a matter of improving at our craft. But the difference in the issues these two media teams have is very telling to me. It means to me that one thing is still exciting, and the other thing is not. LAN tournaments are of course a bit different in nature. They're newer and more fresh, but also, the tournaments make for a more cohesive and connected experience. A top contender who wins the first semifinal round will still have some interest in watching the second semifinals room, even if they aren't in it, because the players that survive that room will be the players that they'll see in the final round. And perhaps it would even be reasonable to root against top competition trying to make the finals from that player's perspective. MKU, on the other hand, has around 20 divisions, which all act as separate tournaments that just happen to use the same format at the same time, where a team may only enter one at a time. Now, I know MKU is loved by this community, but I want to ask you guys something, and I want you guys to be honest with yourself. What makes it exciting, fresh, or new at this point? Why should a Division 4 player care about what happens in a Division 6 primetime match if they don't have like an immediate connection to one of the players in the match? Why should a Division 13 player care about what happens in Division 1 if all the top players will largely just keep to themselves? And why should a slightly more invested Division 5 player care about Division 1 if they feel that the results are super predictable? Now, there was a new MKU champion this last season for the first time in like a year and a half, and it was rather unexpected and cool to see. The defending champions won the first game of the finals by a rather large amount, and it looked as the same script as always was repeating. Someone in the chat even mentioned after the literal first race that the outcome was boring as always, and even if they were wrong to assume that the series was over, that kind of does express some sentiment with how the D1 Finals has been seen in recent times. Now, the achievement of winning Division 1 is higher than it's ever been, to be honest, and requires an insane level of play. But the live view counts of the streams in recent times has been telling. Not only is there not widespread appeal, but the interest to begin with is declining. Are we reaching anybody whatsoever from outside the community? In my opinion, discoverability is perhaps the single most important thing when it comes to creating a better future for the community. Ask yourself, how many origin stories out there involve people finding out about the competitive scene through watching Troy or other content creators? Because I've heard seemingly countless stories about people finding the scene this way. This is why I've always been a huge advocate of people in our community making content, and in recent years we've gotten better at it. Teams like World Friend and RK have relatively big fan bases, and even English content creators have been doing better in recent times too. Hypothetically speaking, this should prove that players shouldn't need to be involved in a tournament or MKU division to have a vested interest in a match, as people can still be fans, and we should want to cultivate this fandom, but from what I can see, we have what we have in spite of the system rather than because of it. For a game as large as Mario Kart, I feel like we should want our broadcast to matter to a lot more people than they currently do. Now, MKU Primetime started a few years back as an attempt to get more players engaged with top-level gameplay. Originally, it was designed to be a Division 1 matchup every week that followed up the regular MKU match times. This meant that people should be free to watch the matches after theirs end, with the goal being that players would learn new things and lower-level spectators could follow a storyline and pick a team to root for and get updates on that team every week. Unfortunately, the top-level teams were not the best about volunteering to be featured, and many would eventually refuse to play in this later window. MKU Primetime then kind of transitioned to whatever division we could find, but as mentioned earlier, it is hard to keep focus on random divisions unless you're involved in that division. The hope was originally that Division 1 could be the exception, as it was, well, the championship league in a sense. And I think it makes sense that ideally, the D1 matchups are the ones we should want people to watch, in hopes that it can be captivating to the community and outside. The other big problem is watching Division 1 kinda sucks. There, I said it. It is one of the least balanced divisions in the entire tournament, and even when MKU is seeded properly, that remains as a feature of this division. When an open-ended competition like MKU becomes imbalanced, the point of the competition can sometimes feel lost. And I would argue that going back to Mario Kart 8 on the Wii U, that getting to the point where the competition is like this is actually inevitable. The only reasonable way to take down a dynasty is to kind of make another super team that makes the rest of the competition even further behind. Now, we had the new result as I mentioned, and sometimes that does happen, but how exactly did it happen? Well, a ton of players from former playoff teams banded together and made a new team, and were motivated to go on the grind together. Many people mentioned that a lot of the players came from HD, but for some of them they actually came from ZE first. And a little bit over a year ago, both HD and ZE were Division 1 playoff teams in the same season, but both came up short against Bree, who were in the earlier phases of their dynasty run. Speaking from the present now, it appears that it took some of the most motivated players from two different playoff teams to ultimately match up against Bree. So now, perhaps there are two teams that are overwhelming favorites to make it back to the finals in a hypothetical Season 27, and of course this is a better situation to be in than having debatably one true contender, as it can provide a reason to be invested in the finals, but it also widens the gap between second and third place too. It's not necessarily a bad thing for ratings if there's kind of like a back and forth rivalry. You know, the NBA had the same finals for 4 years in a row just a decade ago. I believe they were some of the most viewed ones in recent memory, largely due to the star power that was involved in those finals. But I would also argue that the landscape we have is so much different here. We don't want to have a static 30-team league, we want to always be growing. And in the NBA, the players of the teams not in the finals are still heavily compensated. For us, we play for the love of the game, and stagnancy doesn't really have much of a positive effect for anyone. Our community is built around participation, so we want people to be motivated to improve, and if the championship match begins to feel less and less accessible, that motivation will only falter over time. Now, as mentioned, there are a few top-level teams that do have fans, but if a title run starts feeling completely improbable, it becomes harder and harder for fans to feel invested enough in the playoff streams to, make it part of their day. And of course, there's no guarantee that some of the top teams have widespread appeal too. In some ways, you could say this is a non-issue. The best team wins at the end of the day, and I'm the first to admit that this is important if we want our competitions to have integrity. If this is our goal, we are definitely reaching it. But my question is MKU's system truly the pinnacle of Mario Kart competition that the community likes to advertise it as? Because what I've seen over the last 7 years kind of indicates the opposite in some ways. I see a community that, despite having more people than ever, is less active than the teams of the Mario Kart Wii era, because teams would rather not war than play teams 3 divisions off their division level. I see an American community where high-level 6 vs 6 is completely dead in the evening because nobody wants to frequently play under conditions that lead to blowouts, and I don't blame these people one bit. I see a competition where losing a season results in the easiest path to winning the next one. I see that sometimes teams even downplay their own abilities because they want to face weaker competition in the upcoming seasons. And I've seen good players who just don't have an in to a top team turn to Lounge as a way to prove themselves, and I've already spoken in great detail about my disdain for that system. Because Lounge seems like an illegitimate way to define 6 vs 6 players, I see people use MKU division numbers to define players instead, when these divisions should only ever be defining the teams themselves. It is never considered if a player is actually elevating the team that they're on, or if the team is where they are in spite of that player. Everyone kind of plays into the assumption that all D1 players are better than all D2 players, which in itself is another admittance of how imbalanced the tournaments are to begin with. Even if it's not actually true, the fact that people can think this way proves that the imbalance exists. I also see players who would rather trash talk weaker teams while riding the bench of a top team than actually prove their own abilities and merits. I think perhaps the community even confuses itself at times on who the catalyst for winning is on many teams. But as things stand, there's no way to really find out the truth. I see a community where many high division teams think the only path forward toward getting better is through player recruitment. Many team leaders would indicate that they care a lot about player development, but is that actually what's always happening in a lot of these teams? Because while I can certainly think of a few examples where teams and players have improved alongside each other, there are also many examples that indicate that these gestures might sometimes be hollow. The end result appears to be a community where players constantly outgrow their teams, and while that's a bit natural to a degree, it is why new teams rarely replace others in the natural hierarchy, and why many things still feel exactly the same as they were 5 years ago. And finally, I see a system that constantly produces boring matchups. It doesn't naturally incentivize good matchups at all, and that is why it's hard to see the media team significantly improving in the next game no matter what personnel they might have. We will of course have a brief period of change with a new game, but once the dust settles, are we back to square one? Now, Mario Kart has always been my favorite video game series. It was a community that I was always going to search for on my own accord and join. However, I did pick up a second series competitively at some point too, and that was Smash. Smash was not something I naturally cared about, so it had to win me over in ways that Mario Kart didn't really have to, but it succeeded heavily in that regard. A big reason for this was unironically because the community actually had an interesting storyline going. Every major tournament that the community hosted was a spectacle because Smash is just an entertaining game, but looming over every tournament was something greater too. Smash always has a player ranking for each year. It actively seeks out who the best player of the year is, and the crown is something that is frequently fought for throughout the year. Even when the crown is kind of disputed, it just seems to create more discussions and buzz for the next big event. And of course, it doesn't stop there. There's also the ongoing GOAT debate. The Mango and Armada rivalry always felt layered all the way down to playstyles and personalities, and how one might answer the question might come down to how they see the world. Does longevity matter more? Or does sheer dominance for a shorter time matter more? Who had the greatest influence on the game overall, perhaps, is a question. Who peaked the highest? These are the kinds of questions we never have in our community, because our top players often are never challenged to face off against each other in this way, and rarely are they ever in settings where the odds kind of aren't stacked in their favor, namely the big team formats. I think that we are missing out on so many great moments for this very reason. The best wins, in my mind, are often the ones where people had to overcome some adverse situations. Now, you would think there should be more variance on results for a game like Mario Kart that has RNG influence everywhere than a game like Smash Bros. But this isn't really the case when it comes to our team formats, because at the top level of Smash, it is harder for the best player in the world to separate themselves over the second best player than it is for the top team in Mario Kart to do so from the second place team. This is because teams are made up of 6 different people, at least the starting lineups, and to close the gap, it's not going to be a matter of just one person getting better, it's going to be a whole team effort. And perhaps this is all the more reason to shift the focus away from teams and more toward individual players to begin with. Not only would outcomes of our tournaments feel less stale this way, but it is easier for individual personalities to shine in this way. It is easier for a single player to kind of market themselves and stream on their own and create a fan base that way than it is for a full team, for instance. That's not to say it can't happen, but we also don't have the advantage going for us that most ordinary sports teams have, which is kind of a regional pride element. Outside of World Cup at least, but that's kind of, seasonal at best. This is not to say that teams aren't valuable, but because they are, there's not really a way around hosting the MKU format. Unfortunately, I think the truth is that the results are kind of destined to be boring for it though, and that's why I think we need something new to supplement MKU that is more focused on the individual players and their race to become the new world champion. Now, it's not like MKU dynasties go on for as long as people seem to act, but often the end of a legendary run doesn't happen due to the crown being taken away. Often it happens because top teams themselves just get bored and players move around. And I don't say this to discourage people from trying to take the crown on their own, because again, trying to improve is what pushes the game forward. But this path is gradual, and potential spectators and interested parties aren't going to be signing up for gradual. In fact, the process of catching up is often so slow that when something incredible and deserved finally does happen, the community often dismisses the achievement as some kind of impossibility that had to have occurred due to luck. And for a losing team, it can even be easy to attach yourselves to that narrative, because in a sense it does feed the ego. And that's an incredibly toxic mindset for a scene to have when they desperately need interesting things to occur to begin with. Realistically speaking, the MKU format is likely never going to produce the stories at the rate we need it to in order to be a captivating main community event that people consistently tune into. That's not to say that it can't be interesting, or that it never has periods where there are genuine questions about who the favorite to win the upcoming season is, but my point is that when this happens, it's not really by design, and based on what we've observed in the last decade, this appears to be the exception, not the rule. So I think with a new game, we need to invest in something that can be that, and this is not me wanting to cast MKU off to the side. I think it's a great event that serves specific purposes, like playing matches with friends, but it does not serve every purpose. Many people who enter this community have no idea where to even start. The member retention rate seems to be excellent for people that join teams, but this also is not everyone. For inexperienced players, the team joining process can be quite difficult and even a little anxiety-inducing. Joining a team does kind of have an element of job experience to it, like having a prior history makes it easier to get hired, but how are you supposed to get, team experience if people get rejected? Well, we need to have other things to partake in. There needs to be on-ramps. Now, some of you might have instinctively said lounge, but I've also watched new players enter the lounge before, and personally, I feel embarrassed suggesting lounge to new players. I feel like some kind of time grifter. The advice feels disingenuous. And again, I talked about lounge addiction in a prior episode and the resulting toxicity. It's not a great place for new players, in my opinion. Now, I do think a new game might lend us an opportunity to run with some kind of worldwide race hub, where people can maybe share friend codes and race together through MKC Discord channels. At least find matchmaking that way, maybe, be able to talk with people in your game. This kind of stuff happened way more in the past, and I feel like that could even give casual players more use for our community, especially at launch. And if that reputation can be earned, it would allow people to potentially meet future teammates, while also giving us a better shot at selling people on our actual tournaments if they're just kind of on the site in general, even if they're not on it for, competitive purposes yet. But if I think that MKU structure too is, a little casual, while also simultaneously holding the belief that the lounge leaderboard is a terrible way to rank players, what else is there? Well, I think that the game needs a different kind of competition that actually aims to push players to their limits. We should want something that always incentivizes improvement, always creates a challenge, consistently produces good, castable matches that have a lot at stake, and creates an actual direction and story for our game and scene. Furthermore, I think Mario Kart Central needs its own thing to stand out amongst the MK sites of old, because in reality, we've been rehashing a lot of ideas since the beginning of 8D. Now, I've been brainstorming what this idea should be like for years. Community veterans may remember the solo circuit events in 2016 and 2019, and in particular, the 2016 event stands out as the most memorable event of the 8U era in my mind, and a large reason was the fact that we actually created genuine up-in-the-air competition in a community that had otherwise very little. The finals came down to Xander and Sergeant Guy, two teammates on Severance, the dominant team of the game, and really their rivalry in the finals in a sense kind of made the tournament interesting, and that's just not a possibility if they're always on the same team. Perhaps it resulted in better competition. I of course realize though that it's not enough to just run another solo circuit, because while you can try to crown a site champion with a free-for-all circuit, these tournaments have never been like the only thing the community likes to play. Debatably, they're not even that high up on the totem pole either. This is why I shared the central rank proposal a few years back. It was a bit of an imperfect proposal, but one that I still have a lot of belief in the premise of. A ranking system that isn't powered by runbacks and addiction, but rather exciting final tournament rounds where there can only be one winner, would hold a lot of value in my mind. Eliminated players who want better outcomes would need to get there through practicing things like their driving as well, instead of only practicing in a lounge format and hoping that the results are better over and over again. Now, since this original proposal, I've been thinking of modifications that can make the idea truly shine, and I think we could make something like it work on the Switch too. There should be no reason why we can't implement 2 versus 2 tournaments or even 6-on-6 matches into a tournament series, and there should be ways to make those competitions interesting. I do think we can take similar approaches to Lounge, where winning a 2 versus 2 tournament with a lower ranked partner would reflect a little bit better on you than winning one with a top ranked player. And I do think we have ways to manipulate 6-on-6 tournaments, even outside of a UML style draft system, to produce closer top level matches than MKU, where people will still enjoy the set of teammates they have. But perhaps in the circuit, we should find ways to encourage switching up who you play with on occasion to begin with, and I'll provide more details later on this all when requested. Ultimately, we need a competitive tournament series that brings all of the best formats together, and in a setting where all the events truly matter for something too. I'd personally like to see the majority of it all take place on Saturdays, a day that has not had much continuity in recent years. I believe this window could be great for ranked tournaments, while MKU could continue doing its own thing on Sundays. And Lounge, well, it could be great practice for the events that matter, like it should be. The time is coming for us to take off, but still, I am not sure if that desire to run something new is there, as people seem unbothered by the system as it is. Many people only want to do MKU to begin with, and for some, Lounge is really just the only thing that matters to them. But perhaps people in the community just don't comprehend the things that could be possible with just a few simple changes in philosophy. My personal wish is that we go all in on any format that is going to inject more excitement into tournaments again. In my opinion, any cash prizes down the road should be going toward the competitions that are designed to be the most competitive, and these competitions should be our primary streaming focus over things like MKU Primetime. I'll say that one thing Lounge does well is that it does give every player the opportunity to climb its ladder, regardless of their reputation, team status, any of that. And this is what I want us to cultivate in a real tournament setting down the road. And as it stands, we have tournament formats that work. I just do not think that we're getting the most out of them. Our current big matches are not watched nearly enough, and that has to change, and it is not something that is going to change if we continue taking the same approach. Change, of course, though, is challenging. Often people will fight against it simply because it is unfamiliar, and I imagine that if an early tournament were to go poorly for the wrong person, they might lead a crusade against a new potential format. I mean, we saw with the Lounge Q system a while back. It always happens. And perhaps a new system could also uncover a few truths that our current formats hide. Perhaps some players won't be winning as much without a specific set of teammates in every match, or maybe some previously overlooked players will finally get their flowers. The truth can be awesome, but at times uncomfortable for some too. I still think, though, that we owe it to ourselves to pursue it. I believe that down the road, we could have over 1,000 viewers per stream. I could see the articles section of our site revived in discussing the recent happenings of the prior weekend's tournaments, and how it changed the standings. I could see people being excited to prove themselves on a bigger stage than they previously ever could have imagined. It seems like we rarely have free-for-all casts anymore, and often it is just because there isn't enough to play for. But why stop at free-for-alls? What if we had 6 versus 6 competitions where 16 different teams could all very feasibly win it all? How many more players could actually compete for a championship under slightly altered circumstances? How much more gratifying will it be for the eventual world champion if the road to getting there was genuinely hard and not some foregone conclusion? Additionally speaking, when the margin for error is smaller, it means that you have to get every last bit out of yourself that you can. And if that concept doesn't motivate self-improvement as a player, I don't know if anything can. I am grateful for what we have, to be honest. The MKU format has been a big part of my life, strangely, as something I've participated in even going back to the Mario Kart Wii days. But it is 4 games later now, and I feel that perhaps we've squeezed everything possible out of it, and that it might just not be possible to do it better than we already have in the past. We've seen what it provides under ideal circumstances, like a successful game like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and I think it is reasonable to hope for more when the Mario Kart 9 opportunity arises. So I'm going to do whatever I can to do what has seemingly been impossible for a decade now. convince players that we can have more than just MKU, Lounge, and the occasional FFA tournament, and this is where the road begins. So thanks for listening in today. Admittedly, with the Switch 2 Direct coming soon, I kind of just wanted to rush something out just to get the ideas out here before, the hype cycle of Mario Kart 9 takes over completely. There's definitely more to say here, and stronger explanations can be provided down the line. I just wanted to kind of get some basic thoughts out first, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know, and I'll try to elaborate even further. And of course, I'll continue talking about this as time goes. What's going to happen is ultimately going to be decided by the community. So it's good to be as informed as possible. So again, let's start these conversations if we can. With that being said, I've done this for a really long time now. Personally speaking, I just don't really get excited about, the current way of things anymore. I don't think I can do another cycle of, the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe community experience on Mario Kart 9. So we'll see what happens, I guess. Personally speaking, I need something new. I'm hoping that we do something, fresh and ambitious, and even if it isn't perfect or, if it could have been done better, then I'd like to say that, we made a good effort to do things differently, try to grow, expand, and, captivate new players. And I highly doubt that it would be a complete waste. I think that a lot of the ideas here would succeed. We'll see what happens. Obviously, I'm hoping for that route, but, I'm just one person. The community's large, and if, overall it prefers to keep things how it is, that's how it should be. If it's another 30 MKU seasons and, daily lounge streams and all that, then great, perfect. I hope that everything goes, well. But if this is the route, well, count me out.